Now we can look at pH. And again, most of this is going to be review. You learned about pH first in chapter 2, and we've talked about it several times since in other chapters. So remember, your ideal pH is 7.4. And your safe range is 7.35 to 7.45. So as long as you're in that range, you're safe. If you go below that range, so acidosis would be too much hydrogen in your blood. And alkalosis would be not enough hydrogen in your blood. So in either case, if pH is too low or pH is too high, you run the risk of denaturing your proteins. So that goes for both of them. Then remember, we also talked about how if pH is too low, you will have hydrogen enter your cells, and the potassium will be repelled and it will leave, and you will get hyperkalemia, which will lead to cardiac arrest. So this section is going to focus on how you keep your blood pH at 7.4. And you have two things here we're dealing with. We're going to be dealing with hydrogen ions, and we're also going to be dealing with bicarbonate. Bicarbonate is important because it binds hydrogen. Bicarbonate is a buffer. And if you remember, if you go back to the very first page of chapter 25 where we have that box, remember you have a lot of bicarbonate in your blood in your interstitial fluid. So suppose you had a bunch of hydrogens and there were too many of them. A bicarbonate will come along and it will bind a hydrogen. So we started off, we had 3 hydrogens floating around. A bicarbonate will bind one of those, and now you have 2 hydrogens floating around. So bicarbonate is very important because it binds your hydrogen. So as long as you have a balance of hydrogen and bicarbonate, your pH will be 7.4. If you lose bicarbonate, then it's not there to bind hydrogen. And if it's not there to bind it, you'll have too many hydrogens floating around. Back over here, we started with 3 hydrogens. We had a bicarbonate bind one of them. Now we have 2. If the bicarbonate's not there, you would still have 3 floating around, which would be too many. So if it's not there to bind the hydrogen, you will have too many hydrogens. And this will cause a drop in your pH, which would be acidosis. So that's the importance of bicarbonate. It binds hydrogen and prevents acidosis. If you lose bicarbonate, your pH goes down. So now we're going to look at what's going on in your body that would cause changes in your pH. So first we'll look at pH decreases. So remember, if pH is decreasing, this means you're increasing the amount of hydrogen. You are adding acid to your blood. So the things that do this are your diet, and especially meat and wheat will add acid to your blood. Cell metabolism. And remember, metabolism refers to all chemical reactions, not just making ATP. So as your cells are doing their normal thing, they add keto acids, phosphoric acids, and lactic acids to your blood. So your cells add acid to your blood. Then here, notice we have an arrow going away from the blood. That would be loss of bicarbonate. Because remember, if you lose bicarbonate, it's not there to bind the hydrogens, and so you end up with more hydrogens floating around. This happens through diarrhea. So diarrhea has bicarbonate in it, and if someone's having diarrhea, they're losing bicarbonate, which makes their blood pH go down. Okay, then we can look at blood pH increase. So blood pH is increased. This means you have fewer hydrogens. This could be from a vegetarian diet, or if someone has heartburn and they're taking antacids. So now you're adding base to your blood, and this base is going to bind your hydrogens. Then we have an arrow here going away from the blood, which represents a loss. This would be if you vomit. When you vomit, you lose your stomach acid. Stomach acid is hydrochloric acid, HCl. Anytime you vomit and you lose that, your stomach has to make new. And one of the ingredients is hydrogen. So your stomach has to take hydrogen from your blood in order to make new acid. So vomiting makes you lose your stomach acid. Your stomach makes new acid by taking hydrogen from your blood. This reduces the amount of hydrogen in your blood and raises your pH. So vomiting can cause alkalosis. It can make your pH too high. So these are the things going on that would alter your pH, and your body is constantly having to fight to keep your pH at 7.4. So maybe not so much fight, but work. Your body constantly works to counteract these activities. And keep your pH at 7.4. So now we're going to look at the ways your body counteracts these things that are constantly going on. So you're always eating either meat or wheat or vegetables, and you're altering your pH. Sometimes you might take an antacid, you alter your pH. Your cells are doing metabolism, they're putting acid in your blood. People get sick sometimes, have diarrhea or vomiting, that messes up pH. So your body is constantly working to keep it 7.4. So the first thing you have to keep your pH at 7.4 is your buffers. And you first learned about these back in Chapter 2. So review your Chapter 2 lab. Buffers can bind or release hydrogen. And they do this to keep pH at 7.4. So they prevent changes in pH. So if you have too many hydrogens, your buffer will bind some. If you have not enough hydrogens, your buffer will release hydrogens. So they can do either one. They can bind hydrogen or they can release it to make sure that you always have just the right amount of hydrogen. Buffers are found in your interstitial fluid, your blood, and your intracellular fluid. And this relates to that box at the first page of notes. So go back and look at that box. Inside your cells, you have protein. So you have protein buffers. And inside your cells, you have phosphate. So we have phosphate. So inside cells, protein and phosphate act as your buffers. In interstitial fluid, you have bicarbonate. So that's your main buffer. And in blood, you have bicarbonate and protein. So those are the buffers. And notice the clock here. This clock is showing us a small amount of time. Buffers work immediately. They are fast. So as soon as the number of hydrogens change, the buffer immediately responds to restore your number of hydrogens. But they are also the weakest. They have a very limited capacity. And you might remember that from your Chapter 2 lab. So they are fast, but they have a limited capacity. They can only bind so many hydrogens and they only have so many to give. So you can overwhelm your buffers if you make big changes in your hydrogen. Then we get to physiological buffers. So you have two of these. Your physiological buffers are what actually remove hydrogen from your body. So the buffers are just binding. It's temporary. Physiological are a permanent solution. They actually get rid of stuff out of your body. So your first physiological buffer is your lungs. And you already know all about this. We've been talking about it since Chapter 3. Remember, here's your mitochondria. And your mitochondria makes ATP. And while doing so, it also makes carbon dioxide. And it puts that carbon dioxide in your blood. And remember, carbon dioxide reacts with the water in your blood to form carbonic acid. That chemical formula, just to review, that's what happens when you put carbon dioxide in your blood. It makes acid. So you rely on your lungs to exhale carbon dioxide. And when they do, you reverse this chemical reaction and you get rid of, you put that hydrogen back into the water. So your lungs remove acid from your blood by exhaling carbon dioxide. And we talked about this a lot in Chapter 3 and just recently in Chapter 23. So hopefully this is soaking in by now. Your cells, when they make ATP, they also make carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide combines with the water in your blood to make acid, but then your lungs reverse this by exhaling the carbon dioxide, and that forces the hydrogen back into the water where it originally came from. And that reduces the amount of hydrogens floating around in your blood. And if you notice the clock here, this is a little bit slower, but it is also more powerful. So it is slower than buffers, but more powerful. You're not just binding, you're actually removing from the body. Okay, then we go to your kidneys. So this is a review. You just learned this in chapter 24. Your kidneys have the type A cells and the type B cells. So the type A cells are these on the top. And here you have, this is your blood, and this is urine. And remember, they're going to move bicarbonate and hydrogen in opposite directions. So type A cells are going to put hydrogen in the urine, and they're going to put bicarbonate in the blood. And this will raise your pH. So the type A cells get rid of hydrogen in your urine. And this is the most common. This is what most people are doing. So by getting rid of hydrogen in the urine, you raise your pH. But then you do also have the type B cells. There's your type B cells. They're going to do the opposite. They're going to put the bicarbonate in the urine and the hydrogen in the blood. This is rare. Not very many people are doing this. It would mainly just be vegetarians that are doing this, or maybe somebody who's taking a lot of antacids. And if you notice the clock here, the whole clock's filled in. This is a very slow process. It takes several hours or even days for your kidneys to have an effect on your pH, but it is the most powerful. They can make the biggest adjustment to your pH. So if we kind of put all this together here, you have your cells. And this is more of a simplified, but in general, for most people, your cells are putting acid into your blood. So this middle box here represents your blood. In general, for most people, you have this constant flow of acid into your blood. So your first line of defense is your buffers. Your buffers are going to bind it and prevent changes, but that's just a temporary solution. You still have to get rid of it. Think of like if you spill your drink on the table and you use a sponge and you soak up the spilled drink. The sponge is like the buffer. It's there and it kind of sops up the spilled drink from the table, but that's not really solving the problem. You still have your Pepsi, it's just in a sponge now. You have to take the sponge over to the sink and wring it out to actually get rid of it. So then you have your lungs and your kidneys that are going to actually get rid of it. And remember, acid comes in two types, fixed and volatile. So the volatile acid, which is CO2, will be removed by your lungs. And the fixed acid, which is all the others, will be removed by the kidneys. So in general, for most people, your cells are putting acid into your blood. Your buffers are temporarily binding it until your lungs and kidneys can get rid of it. Okay, so some summary questions here. The fastest is your chemical buffers. They work immediately. The most powerful is your kidneys. And the locations of the buffers to that rectangle that we had on your first page of notes. So remember, in your cells, we have phosphorus, so you have the phosphate buffer, and you have protein. Then your interstitial has bicarbonate. Then your blood has bicarbonate and protein. And which type of acid do the lungs eliminate? That is volatile. And remember that kidneys eliminate fixed, and buffers are binding or releasing hydrogen in order to keep the number of hydrogens steady. Okay, now we can look at compensation. So remember, you have your lungs and you have your kidneys. These two organs are what remove acid from your body. So your lungs and your kidneys are what actually remove acid. So they're kind of like a team. And whenever one of them slacks, the other picks up the slack. So that's compensation. If one slacks, the other picks up the slack. So if we look at the lungs first, and this ties into what you've learned in chapters 23 and 24. We're just kind of putting it together here. But remember in 23, we talked about respiratory alkalosis and respiratory acidosis. So let's say you breathe too much. Right? You're hyperventilating. If you breathe too much, you lose carbon dioxide, which means you lose acid from your blood, which makes your pH go up. And so you would have respiratory alkalosis. You need to then retain some acid in your blood. So your kidney would compensate for this by retaining acid in your blood. So in this case, your volatile acid would be low, right? You don't have enough carbon dioxide. Your kidney makes up for this by causing you to have high fixed acid. Okay, so to kind of explain this, let's say you have 2 volatile acids and 2 fixed acids, so that your total acid is 4. If volatile acid is low, you only have 1 volatile acid. Your kidneys would retain some fixed. So now you have 3 fixed. You still have a total of 4. So as long as you have a total of 4, your pH is 7.4. Now that 4 is just a made-up number. The point is you have to keep the total acid the same. So if one is too high or too low, you adjust the other so that your total comes out the same. Let's keep going with this. Let's say you're not breathing enough. If you're not breathing enough, you will retain carbon dioxide. So you're going to have high volatile acid. So now let's give you 3 volatile acids here. That means you have respiratory acidosis. You're going to have your pH is going to be low, and you have respiratory acidosis. So what are your kidneys going to do to compensate for this? Well, your kidneys will get rid of more fixed acid. So now you'll only have 1 fixed. So that, again, your total is 4. Right? You're always wanting to keep that total the same in order to keep your pH 7.4. So if your lungs are messing up, your kidneys will compensate. If you were supposed to have, if this top one is what you should have, say you're supposed to have 2 volatile, 2 fixed for a total of 4. Your lungs mess up, you only have 1 volatile. Your kidneys will give you 3 fixed, so you have a total of 4. Your lungs mess up, you have 3 volatile. Your kidneys will compensate and give you 1 fixed, so you have a total of 4. It can go the other way also. Your kidneys can be the ones that mess up. Let's say that you have too much fixed acid in your blood. This is called metabolic acidosis. So this could be from kidney failure. It's very common in people with diabetes. Remember in chapter 17, if you have diabetes, you get too many keto acids because you're breaking down fat since you can't use glucose. And if you have, so like someone with diabetes makes a lot of keto acids, and it can be more than the kidneys can handle. And they can't keep up with getting rid of all those keto acids, and the keto acids build up, and you get metabolic acidosis. So this would be where you have too many fixed. So your lungs are going to respond by getting rid of more volatile. So your compensation now is to breathe more. So you're going to get rid of extra carbon dioxide. So now you would only have 1 volatile instead of your standard 2. And that brings you to your total of 4. And this you can see, this is called Kussmaul breathing. And you see this a lot in people with diabetes. So someone who has diabetes might just be sitting in their chair watching TV, totally relaxed, but they're breathing heavy like they're running a marathon. The reason they're breathing heavy is because their body is making so many keto acids that their kidneys can't keep up, their blood pH is falling, so their lungs compensate for this by getting rid of extra carbon dioxide. So they're making their volatile acid very low in order to compensate for the high fixed acid and keep the blood pH at 7.4. And the final scenario, you can lack fixed acid, right? You don't have enough fixed acid. So it could be for some reason the kidneys are putting too much acid in the urine, or it could be something else going on, like vomiting, where your stomach is then grabbing hydrogens from your blood. For whatever reason, there's not enough fixed acid. This is metabolic alkalosis. So your fixed acid is too low. You only have 1 instead of 2. So now your lungs are going to compensate by breathing less. And if you breathe less, you will retain carbon dioxide. So now you're going to have extra volatiles so that it gets you back to that total of 4, and you keep your pH at 7.4.